Okay, so we're gonna draw this out here, and I want you to copy down what I put here on your paper, so you'll have your own copy of the story sequence chart. Now, in the beginning of a story, what do you usually hear about? What's usually the first thing you ever hear? The characters. Once upon a time, there was a person. Right? I mean, without a person or something, right, you can't really have a story, right? So we would call that the characters. And there could be one character. There could be more than one character. We have the characters. And those characters are usually in a place, right? A time or a place, a situation. We have a particular term for that we use in talking about stories. Does anyone know it? It starts with an S, E, T. T.
A sentence.
Not a sentence. Good guess. Setting. A setting. A circumstance. A situation. A setup for something. A lineup. You know how when you set the table, you're supposed to do it in a certain way? Put your fork on the left, plate in the middle, knife and spoon on the right, napkin on the plate or under the fork. And then if you go somewhere, you get a salad fork, and then you get a little dessert fork, and then you get a little, extra spoon. You got complex setting. We don't want that for right now. We want simple. So characters and setting. Okay, the next major part of the story. What do you think has to come next? Anna?
What they're doing.
What they're doing.
The drama.
The drama. The drama. What makes drama? What makes something interesting or exciting, Anna?
Something happened that was bad.
Something happens that was bad. Usually that's the case, right? You have some kind of challenge or some kind of thing that makes a problem, right? So you have a conflict or problem. Without a conflict or problem, your story can be a little boring, right? So let me tell you a couple stories, okay? Here's story number one. One morning, a little girl named Jennifer woke up and went into her kitchen to fix herself some cereal. But she discovered she had no milk for her cereal. She couldn't possibly eat her cereal with no milk, and being the industrious, energetic little girl that she was, she decided to go and get some from the corner store down the road. So she got some money from her money box. She carried it all the way down to the corner store. She walked into the store and said, "Good morning." And the man who worked in the store said, "Good morning, Jennifer." She got the milk. She paid for the milk. She took the milk and she carried it all the way back to her house, where she went in and poured the milk on her cereal. It went snap, crackle, and pop, and she had a great breakfast of Rice Krispies. The end. How do you like this story? So. I mean, there is a problem. What's the problem? She has no milk. But is this a big enough problem? I mean, there's no real danger. I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen to her? She has to eat something else. So it's a little bit bleh. Yeah, she got to eat pancakes. Okay, let's back up and try a little variation on the story. Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Jennifer who woke up one morning and discovered she had no milk for her cereal. She couldn't possibly eat cereal without milk, so she, being the industrious and energetic child that she was, decided to go get some from the corner store down the road. She got her money from her money box, and she went out and walked down the road, where she entered into the store and said, "Good morning." And the man in the store said, "Good morning, Jennifer." And she got the milk. She paid for the milk, and as she was walking out of the store and halfway down the block back to her house, there was a rustling in the bushes. And out from the bushes emerged a huge, rabid Rottweiler dog, as tall as she was, foaming at the mouth, eyes yellow and bloodshot, teeth glinting in the sunlight, and it began to walk toward her slowly. Okay, what's the difference between these two stories?
Was a dog.
There's a dog, not just a puppy dog, but a
Killing machine.
A killing machine. Oh, I like how you put that, Addison. Okay, so now we have a problem that makes a story. Now there's some suspense. Would you agree? Okay. Now, the next section of the story, if you create a problem here, you probably need to have what here?
A conclusion.
A conclusion, or we might actually call it, a problem usually has like a solution, right? And so we call this the resolution. And oftentimes there's a high point in the story. Have you ever had that you're reading a story and it's just like so interesting you can't possibly hear your mom tell you that it's time to set the table? Have you ever had that happen? Because it's just so interesting. Oftentimes you're at the climax there, right? So that means high point. The most exciting moment of the story. There's a resolution. So if I take my little story with Jennifer and the milk, I want to build up a little bit toward the climax. I want to solve the problem, right? Okay, so those are the 3 points, 3 sections, you could even call them mini chapters or something. In our case, we're going to make 3 paragraphs. And to help you think about these things, we want to add some questions to our chart, okay? So, if you want to think, if you want to find out the characters, what question would you ask? Yeah. What's their name? Or even more simply, who are they? Yes, so your question here is going to be who? Who is in the story? You're also a little bit curious. What are they like? What's their personality? What's their character? What's their situation? What's their circumstance? It's not quite enough to say, once upon a time there was a prince. It's not enough information. You want to know, is he a handsome prince or a not so handsome prince? Is he a rich prince or a poor prince? Is he a tall prince or a short prince? Is he a fat prince or a thin prince? Is he a young prince or an old prince? Is he a temporarily changed into a frog prince? There's a lot of options, right? So you want to ask, who's in the story? What's he like? What's his personality? What's his situation? What's his character? For setting, right, we ask the questions where and when. Where and when. Because that gives us a little bit of a picture, a little bit of a mood, right? So you get a little bit of an image. So then you kind of get the picture. Okay, now we've got who, where, when. If we want to figure out what the problem is, what question do we ask? What's happening? Yeah, what? What is the problem? What's Jennifer's problem? The big dog is threatening her life, right? Milk. So this causes her, no, I think the milk is really secondary at this moment, right? She could lose that milk forever and she would be okay as long as she stays alive or unharmed. Yeah, well, no, I don't think the dog wanted the milk. The dog was crazed. The dog was rabid. The dog was a wild, sick animal. Yeah. Okay, so she has a want or need, which is to escape. Some stories are about that, aren't they? You have a want or need. We got to escape the bad guys. We got to get out of here. We got to get saved from some big peril, right? Sometimes the want is more of a want than a need. For example, we want to climb that mountain. Or we want to solve this mystery. or we want to escape Count Olaf. Then you kind of develop it and you say, okay, in order to get what they want or need, what do they think? What do they say? And what do they do? See if you can squeeze those in there. What do they think, say, or do? And these things can be a little mixed up. You can sometimes find out what people are thinking by what they say. Or sometimes what they say is what affects the change. So, and you may ask these questions more than once. What did she think? What did she say? What did she do? What else did she think, say, or do? What else did she think, say, or do? Right? All right, we've got who, where, when, what. The question now is how? How is this problem solved? Okay, so I've got Jennifer, and the rabid dog is right there endangering her life. So let's solve the problem. Jennifer is afraid, and she panics, and she drops the milk, and she screams, and she runs down the sidewalk away from the dog. This causes the dog to have an animalistic reaction, and he runs after her. Jennifer turns, she screams, the dog leaps, his huge jaws clench down on her head, killing her instantly. The end. Okay, what do you think of this?
Gruesome.
Is it horrible? Did it solve her problem?
No.
Sure it did. She no longer has to worry about this dog. Yeah. Sometimes people write stories where the characters die. Have you ever read that?
Yeah, it's the worst books ever.
The worst books ever? Yeah, you tend. All right, so you don't like that ending? Okay, redo. That's the great thing about being a writer. You can control what happens. All right. As Jennifer faces this wild, rabid animal endangering her life, she remembers from Girl Guides, don't make any sudden movements when confronted with wild animals. So she holds herself still and makes very slow steps backwards. The dog is staring, growling, and a police cruiser happens by at just that time. The policeman sees the dog, sees the little girl, stops his car. He gets out of the car. This startles the dog, who then starts to run toward the girl. The police pulls out his taser and zaps the dog, who then falls down unconscious. The policeman scoops up the girl, calls animal control to come and pick up the dog, takes her home, where she has a nice breakfast with milk on her cereal. Okay, is that a better ending? Yeah, probably so. Okay, now there's one more question here. We've got who, where, when, what, how. There's one more question of the big six. What is the last question? We haven't asked it yet. Who, what, where, when, how. What's the last one?
Why?
Why? Why? Why have the story? Why have any story? Why do people like stories? Why do people tell stories? Why have humans for thousands of years made up and told stories to each other? Yeah. So you don't get bored. Because they were bored. That's possible. That's possible. Any other reason why we have stories? What does a good story do for you? Anna? Makes you imagine things. It also, if it's a good story, makes you what? Genevieve? Remember. And what kind of things would you like to remember from the stories? Okay, the good parts about it. Addison?
To stand still while wild animals.
Ah, okay, now you're hitting the point. Why have the story? There's some kind of, what would you call it? Message? Lesson, some kind of moral, wisdom, something to learn, right? So the reason to have the story is to learn something. And so then the question might be, what is learned from that story, right? Sometimes it's really kind of obvious. You get a story and you say, don't slap yourself, it'll hurt. Bald Man and the Fly. Sometimes it's pretty obvious. In The Hare and the Tortoise, what happens? You know that story? Don't stop, keep going. Slow and steady wins the race, right? In the story of Little Jennifer and the Rabid Dog, what's the story? What's the thing to learn? Yeah. Don't run from a wild animal, and support your local police department. Or, there's sometimes a lot of different messages you could get. So, what's learned? And sometimes, I don't know, have you ever read a book with a little bit of an epilogue? Have you ever heard that term, epilogue? It means after the story. So, sometimes you'll hear a prologue, which is like what happens before the story, then you get the story, and then sometimes there's a little epilogue, what happens after the story. So, sometimes you get that kind of that's when, the climax is over, the dog is tasered out, and the policeman has Jennifer in his arms, and he carries the poor shaken girl home, where she tells her mother about the experience. Mother says, I'm so glad you went to Girl Guides and remembered how to deal with crazy animals. And she had a nice breakfast. She had a nice breakfast. Kind of wraps it up, doesn't it? I mean, if she set out for milk for her cereal, you've got to give her some cereal milk, don't you think?